talk about what is trauma. Oftentimes, you hear people speak the word trauma, and we use it so loosely in today's culture. But trauma is basically, I love Gabor the Canadian psychologist. I love his definition of trauma. He says trauma is not the thing that happens outside of us, but it's what happens inside of us. When we go through a traumatic event, whether it be a car accident, whether it be an abusive situation, now he separates trauma by a big T and a little t. Now he's not making trauma any less significant because your trauma may have been abuse. My trauma may have been what he would refer to as a little t, would be some type of neglect where my mom may not have, or my parents may not have been affectionate towards me, may have neglected to give me hugs and kisses. And I may have been traumatized that way because I didn't get the necessity things that I needed, everything that I needed. But there was no brute force applied to me, and no sexual or physical abuse. And he would address those as big T's, the big T trauma, when there's something really physically done to you or sexually done to you or something forcefully, a grave injury towards you, such as a psychological, emotional, being called something, bullied, and things of that nature. But it's also the little T's, the things that we don't even think of. So I would talk to somebody and say, "Well, I don't think I had a traumatic childhood," and then I tell them, "Well, did you get embraced? Were you always told that you were special? Were you always told that you were loved? Were you always made to feel loved and special and safe?" And I said, "No, but I knew I was loved." I asked them, "How did you know?" "Well, my mom or my dad or my family, they cared for me." And I asked them, "How did they care for you?" "Well, they paid the bills. They fed me." They talk about the bare necessities. But I say, were you ever told I love you? Were you ever told and encouraged and motivated? Well, I didn't need that. Well, everybody needs that, right? So those could be little T's, the traumas where you wasn't allowed to, or you wasn't prepared for the world or the stresses of the world. So when you grew up, you didn't know how to handle stressors, or you grew up in a household watching domestic violence, right? That could be a little T trauma. You watch your parents fight. It may not be that violent fight, but you watch them argue, or you watch them abuse drugs or alcohol. That could leave you traumatizing, and that's what Gabor would call a small T. Now, trauma, again, going back, going back to his definition, it's not what happens outside of you, but what happens in you. And continue with his definition, and what he meant by that is trauma separates us. We were meant to be connected. You have a body, have a spirit, and have a mind, and all three of those are supposed to be connected in unison with one another. Well, when you go through a traumatic event, what happens is you separate from your body. Now, that sounds strange, but I'm going to tell you, I can vouch for you. It happens. Um, for those who know my story, I was assaulted in a set of bleachers at a football stadium. Now, the very same year, the next year, I had to go to school at that high school. Now, the wisdom of that little boy, I still marveled at his wisdom. He went down to that football stadium and told the football coach he wanted to play football. And so I played football, ran track in that very same stadium where my assault occurred for the next 4 years of my life. And not once did I think about what happened to me. Now, I used to ask myself, now, how did that even happen? It's because when I was assaulted, my spirit and my body split. I was no longer the same person. I was no longer the person in that body. I separated myself from that body. So, in order for me to maintain any type of life or survival skill, I had to pretend that I wasn't the person that was assaulted in that body. That was a whole different person. Now, I wasn't doing this consciously, it happened unconsciously. That was a split. And so that's what trauma does. But what happened was I started hiding. My whole life became a pattern of hiding. Playing football wasn't for the love of the sport. Because anybody who grew up with me, they would tell you I hated sports. I didn't like football. I didn't like the impact, the violence of it. But it was a way for me to hide behind a uniform. And then I joined the military. Then I became a police officer. Now you can see the pattern. I wasn't comfortable being seen or known. And that's what my passion is. That's what God birthed me to do now, is to help wounded people feel seen, feel like they belong, feel like they have value and worth. Because I know what that's like. I did it all my life. And so that's why I created this podcast, because God wants me to help you feel seen, because I know what it's like to go through a life full of trauma and how to use coping mechanisms, thinking that they're going to help you cope, but they only make things worse. So if you're listening to me and you've been traumatized with a big T, small t, just know there's a way that you can be healed, but there's a process to it. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is understanding what it is that you're going through. So so you have to understand trauma, that you're not a bad person. Something bad happened to you. Just that very line. I mean, just pause and think about that. You're not a bad person. Something bad happened to you. That was not your fault. You couldn't avoid it. You didn't do anything to deserve it. But somebody did something to you when you were vulnerable, when you were innocent, when you were just being yourself. And so now it throws you into this conundrum of, what did I do? You have questions. Why me? Why did God let this happen? Why didn't anybody notice this? Why was this person, why did they choose me by all the people in the world? And so it kind of causes you to separate from the world, because now you see the world is a very dangerous place. Nothing's safe. So you're always on 10. Like, can I trust this person? Can I trust that person? In order to survive in the world, you minimize yourself. That's what I did all my life. You know, my mom had 5 kids. I made sure I wasn't a bother to my mom, but I was always considered the good kid. You know, be like Kevin. Kevin don't bother. He don't create a stare. He don't beg for money. He don't get in trouble. But that's because I wanted to be as little and as small, as invisible as possible. You know, it's no coincidence. One of my first books that I attempted to write was titled The Invisible Little Boy. You know, I wrote that book. I wasn't even thinking about, I didn't have knowledge of trauma like I do now, but that was my subconscious talking. That was my little boy inside of me, called the invisible little boy. But that's what I felt like growing up, invisible. People bullied me, you know. Even to this day, I show up 30 minutes to an hour early for events. But that stems from my past. Because when I used to show up in classrooms late, or even on time when people are already in the classrooms, everybody with eyes would come to me, and everybody would start talking about what I had on, the clothes that I was wearing, or how I looked. So I learned to get there early and sit in the back of the classroom. So when people came into the classroom, they wouldn't see me. And so I was avoiding attention. I became a master at avoiding attention, or I became a master at performing so that I only got good attention. I hated criticism. So I made sure that whatever I did, I was good at it. So that's what trauma is and what it does to you. It makes you separate from yourself and make you think that you're not worthy of anything good, anything lovable. You minimize yourself. You become a people pleaser. And so if that's you, just know there's a way you can heal from that. But the first step is acknowledgement in education. And so that's why I created this podcast. I created this podcast because I was going around the world teaching at conferences, teaching on stages, but I was teaching professionals who kind of knew what trauma was and what the effects of trauma were. There was very few people in the audience that was affected by this epidemic, this endemic, I would say. Because trauma is so written and so enmeshed in our culture that it's become a norm, that we don't even realize that we're traumatized most of the time. We talk about it, we sing about it, we see it in the movies. It takes something drastic, or some celebrity, or some business person, somebody famous, to do something to somebody, get caught doing something like human trafficking, or get charged with a sexual assault, for us to really pay attention to what is happening in our culture or society, or a priest or a pastor or a minister. Uh, but this happens every day. In fact, statistics show that, I mean, that one in 10 persons before they turn 18 would experience some type of abuse before they even graduate high school. I mean, think about that. Every 60 seconds, somebody's abused. I mean, think about that. That's horrible. That every night that you and I lay down, there's a kid somewhere in the country, in the world, who's been molested, who's been abused, even killed and murdered. And just think about that. And then we create a culture where it's not friendly, it's not really cool to talk about abuse. I mean, think about it. When the last time you hear somebody like me have this conversation? You're not. So I wanted to come on here and talk about, let's really start talking about trauma. Now we're going to dig deeper. I just want to come on here and just give you a kind of like a brief overview of what some of the things we're going to talk about trauma, how it affects your being in the world, how it affects your relationships, how it affects your relationship, not just to other people, but to yourself, to God. I know a lot of Christians that go to church and they think they have a good relationship with God, but they're offering up false selves to God and wonder why they're not blessed. Because they're trying to get God to bless the self that they created in order to survive. God doesn't want to bless the survival self. God wants to bless the true self. So I want to teach you how to heal and give God and offer up God, that true person. Because God, this is why I call the podcast the traumatic God, because he wants to enter in with your trauma and walk with you and heal with you. And so it's a process. And then we're going to talk about how it affects your success in the world. How is it that it robs from you your ability to be successful, to go after things that you want to do in life, to have a desire. I didn't know what it was like to desire something. I felt guilty if I wanted something. I was okay having somebody else wanting something from me because I thought that's what I was only good for, was giving, but I didn't know how to receive. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about your health, your physical health, how it affects your physical being. Like when you hold on to this stuff all these years, like me, pre-diabetic, had a TIA, almost a mini strokes, and just being young and obese, and just just don't know how to take care of yourself because you're eating bad things. And it's not just the eating. And that's the thing I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna do a show specifically on foods, because it amuses me when I see so many people talk about, well, I'm vegetarian, I'm vegan, I don't eat pork. But you traumatized, or you have so much trauma in your life that it's still causing you health issues. So we think it's just the food, where it's not just the food. It's the trauma, because trauma calls your brain to crave certain things like sugar and fat, because when you're stressed out all the time, the brain uses most of your calories. So the brain tricks you into craving certain foods to keep it running at that high level of stress and releasing this cortisol and all these stress hormones. Your brain needs that sugar. It needs those carbohydrates to keep you functioning in that survival mode for such long periods of time. So what you think is bad eating habits is really cravings for these types of foods. So we think it's just food. But nobody wants to talk about the trauma that's pushing you to make these decisions and choices. And then that's what we're going to talk about also, how trauma affects all your decisions, unresolved trauma. So the goal is to get us to a place where we're healing from our trauma. Now, when I say healing, I mean ing, not the ed, not the healed. When people say I am healed, I don't believe that there's an ed to healing. You may be healed from one aspect of something, but there's always something else you probably need to be healed from. So I just say ing. Always allow God to be the the entity to pull you into something that He wants to perfecting you. Okay, and so that's why in the Traumatic God podcast, we're just going to talk about things. But my whole goal is to make you successful. I never thought that I would be using my pain to help other people, and I never thought I would be on television doing shows and speaking around the country and the world. I never thought that. But it was a process. And so it was even one of those things where here I am with all this wisdom and knowledge about trauma, and I was sitting back too afraid to share it because you know why? My trauma was telling me you don't have anything to share. And then when I was offering information, people didn't want to hear it because this is not a topic that people are going to run to. I'm not telling you prophecies about you making $1 million or you're going to be a millionaire. You're going to speak across the world. I'm not telling you that. I'm not giving you secrets to be a well-known paid speaker, six figures. That's not what I'm doing. So people not running to my website trying to become a member of anything. I'm not selling you anything. I'm giving away stuff, right? I'm giving away stuff about how to be well, how my coping mechanisms almost destroyed my life, my marriage. I'm telling you those things. People really don't flock to those things because it goes back. You'll hear me talk about in other podcasts when Jesus asked the man at the pool of Bethesda, "Do you want to be made well?" The reality is, a lot of people don't want to be well because being sick is all they know. That the scripture in the Bible said the people love darkness rather than light. And Jesus says there are two roads, the narrow and the wide. Most people choose the wide road because it doesn't take any work to just live or survive. And so, but to be healed and live your best life, you have to go through the process and you have to confront some stuff that you are not willing to confront at first, but it gets better. And that's what I tell people. In the beginning, healing hurts. But as you go through the process, you start realizing it was well worth the hurt and the pain to come out on the other side. And on the other side is that purpose. It's that purpose, and you prevail and you become an example. And so that's what I want for you. That's what I want for you. I want you to be able to say, man, God was with me the whole time and I didn't know it, right? To see the footprints that God was carrying you. So that's what I want for you. Just like he did it for me, he can do it for you. And so that's why I created this podcast. I want you to walk along with me so that I can show you how he did it for me. And we can walk together and find some things out and how we can get better. It's Kevin McNeil. Till next time, next week, join me. We're going to talk about how trauma affects your decision making. All right. So until next time, peace.